Okay, so we're going to look at how we go about creating these automated processes. We've heard a lot about it, that Microsoft 365 has these built-in features in order to simplify our workflows. Now, we have to be cautious about what simplification of workflows are. It can make processes much simpler. For example, a simple process would be data collection. What happens with that data collection later on? What is my follow-up? So the natural processes that I have in my organization. Do I send an email to the person who filled in the form? After that, what happens? Do I have to follow through with that? Do I have to approve it? If it's approved, how do I keep track of those approvals? And so on and so on. There are very many avenues we can take. So what I thought about was kind of breaking the apps that are commonly used so that we can start to see how we can link it all together in terms of automation. Just in case you're not aware of who I am, my name's Omar. There's my email. Like I said, if you do want to follow up specific to your organization, please feel free to send me an email and I can guide you in the right direction. We're open to doing that. I am a former mathematics teacher, and I can see some of your names that are appearing and looking at the registration list. You come from a wide, diverse organizations. Some of you from schools. I can see some from corporate sector. So like I said, this is going to be quite varied in terms of your needs, but I'll do my best to try to introduce you to all the different avenues that you've got in terms of automation. Okay, just so that you know, I have prepared a wakelet of resources. I'm going to paste that into the chat for you. So much of the things that I am going to demonstrate today or show you or talk about, I've included in this wakelet of resources. So if you do go to that link, you'll see this lovely page which has all the links that you need. If you do want to redeem, if you are part of the Microsoft educator community and you want to redeem a specific code to say you've attended this, that's there as well. But what's more important are the follow-up materials in here. So everything that I am going to discuss and show you, I've linked into resources that are available on the Microsoft websites. So it's quite useful to keep that URL that I've pasted into the chat. And if you can access that chat, great. If not, just give me, a smiley face or a sad face or whatever, just so that I'm aware who doesn't, so I can make a note of it and send a follow-up email. So over here, you can see all these links that you've got in terms of automation. It is important to understand the depth of automation that you can get into. And like I said, in this particular session, we can't go too deep into it, but I can give you an overview as best as I can. The apps that we'll be looking at as well, I've pinned in there with other wakelets, so you can get some further information later on if you do want a follow-up to that. So it's all in there for you. But I prefer to do things live rather than just give you a bunch of resources that you can look at. Okay, so let's get started. This is the agenda. So there are a couple of several applications we can look at, but the ones that I want to quickly look at to start with, it'll only take us about 15, maximum 20 minutes, is to just have an overview of the tools that can be used in terms of automation. So these are the ones that I want to focus on. So we're going to look at something called Forms, which I'm sure many of you have already used. You would have found that in your Office application anyway. So when you go to microsoftoffice.com, so if I just jump into office.com, there we go, you'll see that you do have one of your applications along the side, or however way it appears. You've got Microsoft Forms there for data collection. You've got lists, Microsoft Lists. This is not readily used because due to our nature, we tend not to like change, and we tend to use Excel to collate our data. So Forms, for example, to view the data, would have to extract it into an Excel sheet and manipulate it accordingly. But what you can also start to look at is something called lists. Lists are a fantastic way to visualize that data in a way that other users can be comfortable with. As we know, many people who are not familiar with Excel tend to shy away from it. So list is a nice way to sort of visualize Excel data or forms data to keep track of information. We'll dive into that as well. There's also the approvals aspect that we're going to look at. And then finally, the big one is Power Automate. This is the tool that allows us to automate and link things together. For example, forms to lists, approvals, sending out emails based on form replies, and so on and so on. So we'll have a quick look at that and see how they all link together. But in particular, it's about the planning process. You need to have that in place in order to sort of link it all together. So we're going to go through this kind of an agenda, but it is free flowing, and I will show you some of the examples that I have set up in my tenancy. Okay, so first off, we're going to look at forms, and just remember, at any point, please drop your questions. It'll be nice to understand your specific background, your context, whatever it may be, into the chat so I can steer the conversation accordingly as best as I can. So forms, as you know, is a very nice way to sort of collect data that we need. It gives you a nice visual interpretation. You can share the results as much as you want, collaborate on the content. And I'm certain you've used forms as much as you could to a certain extent, but you realize the limitation with it is that in order to get the data out, you collect the data, but the next step would be, what do I do with that data? Because that's the automation part. I've got my data. I now need to sort of act upon it. And that's where we look at the next step. Just before we move on in terms of forms and move on to list, there are a couple of ways to extract that data. So if you normally create a form, just so that you're aware, it creates an Excel sheet, a static Excel sheet, sort of a one point in time. There is another way to do it, and something that's not readily used. It is becoming more used, that you can actually create a form from a spreadsheet. So a quick example could be that I'm working in finance and I create an Excel sheet. So if I bring up my Excel here, I can easily go and link, so I haven't put anything in there, but I can easily insert, if I needed to, a specific form to it, especially if I've saved it first. So I need to just make sure I save that. I'll save it into my OneDrive and call it expenses. So I'm creating a quick spreadsheet here. And once that's saved, I can eventually link into it a form. It's probably better if I do it inside of a team space. If I bring up my team space, I prefer to use Teams. So if I'm in the finance department, for example, and I go into expenses and I want to create a new Excel sheet here. So I just create an Excel sheet. Let's call it expenses. So I've got my Excel sheet. I can click on the insert and insert a form directly to it. So I don't have to fill this Excel sheet up, but I could just link it directly to a form and add certain text. So I can call it item name and let's say price. And finally, just a quantity. Okay, of course, I can put it into build more detail in that if I needed to, but again, we're not going to go into that. So I can put restrictions and make sure it's just a number and so on and so on. So once that's done, I've got my form. I can share that out with whomever I need to, either in a team or whatever it may be. But just to show you what I mean, now I can put in an item name and call it, let's say, textbooks, whatever it may be. The price, I'll say it's £5 per one, and the quantity is 10. I need 10 of those. Submit. That will automatically update my Excel sheet that I created. So there it is, and it's told me who put it in, what the price, the item name, and the quantity. Now, the beauty of this is that I can actually manipulate this in real time. So for example, I can put in total on the side, and here I can just say something like just a basic formula for now, that times that, and I've got it in there. So I'm just going to push this to the side and bring that form back for a second. So there's the expenses, and just put it on the side there. And my, ooh, I've lost it. There it is. Okay, perfect. And I just want to show you how this automatically updates with my expenses. There it is. Okay. So just have a look at this on this line. So I've created that extra sheet there. I'm just going to add another one in. So let's go to responses and preview. And I'm going to call it pens quantity 100, and each one costs 0.99. And as soon as I submit that, eventually this will update in real time and give me a total. Oh, wrong expenses sheet. Let me just do that again. There we go. Okay, so let's do that again. Pence. Price £0.99. And 100 of those. Submit. And in my spreadsheet, there it is. It automatically updates and gives me a total. So one way to quickly automate in a spreadsheet in a team is to use that scenario where you just create an Excel sheet, but link it to a form. It will auto-populate and you can add as much as you can. Of course, you can add the conditional formatting, whatever you need, as long as you don't remove those columns that were pre-populated because of the form, then that is a live form that you can keep track of. Now, that's great because I don't have to traditionally extract the form. So for example, in any of these forms that I have, so if I go into that one, and I go to responses, I have to actually open it or download that data, and it's static. And I have to remember to always download that if I want the latest data in order to manipulate. Whereas if I use the insert option for a form on a blank one, that gives me the ability to have a live data form that I can manipulate inside of a team. So that's the one I created, and I can see it as live as I want to. So it's quite useful to be able to be aware of that in terms of forms. So that's quite good. But again, it doesn't necessarily automate anything. It's just an advanced feature of forms that you can use. So just as a quick reminder, remember, you can easily create an Excel workbook inside of a team or a SharePoint space. So if you're using SharePoint or OneDrive Online, you can create a workbook in the cloud. And in that cloud, you can easily just link it to a form and it'll pre-populate. So I can easily go to Insert, choose Form, and add a form. And that form, whatever you've created, you can share it to any other account. So I'm just going to open another user here. And that particular user, if he's got that link to the form, there we go, the expenses report. He can fill it in and say paper, price £0.10, and he needs 1,000 sheets. And that will auto-populate the expenses form directly as and when you need it. So if I come back in here, you can see that the expenses data should have that new entry directly put in there. There it is, paper, and it cost £1,000. £100, and you can see who's actually entered it. So it's quite useful to keep that live data in your arsenal of automation. So just remember, with forms, you can do that. But again, it doesn't necessarily link me into further automation. Now, that's where we naturally need to think about what are our next steps here. So I've got a form to capture the data. I can either have it in the cloud or as a static Excel that I have to keep opening up every time. That's not a problem. It's just a way to capture that data. The next step from here is to think about how to visualize that. One way to do it is traditionally in an organization, you've got that Excel data wherever that may be, however way you've captured it. So in my case, I've got it as an Excel sheet in a team, the next step would be this is not very aesthetically pleasing. I can spend a lot of time adding another sheet in there, putting in pivot tables, doing whatever I need to in order to visualize that with conditional formatting, etc. But one thing to bear in mind that you do have available to you is something called lists inside of Office 365. So I'm just going to show you an example of a list so that you're aware of what it looks like, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. So for example, in my SLT team, my SharePoint site, I've got a channel called cover requests, and I've got a list already built into there. Now this just looks like an Excel sheet, but this is a list that sort of pre-populates based on a form entry. Another way to look at it is if I go into the all staff here, I may have an incidents list pinned at the top, and I can visualize it in a card view. Now the beauty of this is I can always add a new item, so a new incident in this case, or add it as a list like that. I can see who's put it in, and it'll link to the Office 365 account, so I get the full names here. I can add more columns if I need to. Now, lists are a fantastic way to visualize things. So ideally, what I would like is my expenses to appear as a list so that in a specific team, I can view those lists and maybe have an approval on the side to say whether it's been approved or not. So what I would like is the form to update a list that can be pinned in a team, and only the members of that team or on a SharePoint site can approve or deny that particular expenses report. So let's just have a look at see what lists can do. So lists is a nice way to just create, share, track, whatever you need with anyone on any device, much more than an Excel sheet can do. Now, of course, Excel has a lot more functionality in it in terms of calculations and so on, but you can still update a list based on an Excel sheet if you need to. And of course, you still have the basic things inside of a list to do with formatting and the visual interpretation in a much simpler way. So how do I go about creating a list? Well, that's fairly straightforward as well. I can just open up my Office 365 if I need to. I can go to Office 365, and if I look at all my apps, you'll notice that you've got lists there. When you choose to create a list, you can either import it based on an Excel data sheet, so it'll put in the column aspects for you, so I can import it. I can use it an existing list and just duplicate it. Alternatively, I can just create a blank list. I'm going to just pick any one of these pre-created templates at the moment. So if I just say Asset Manager, for example, it'll give me an example of it, so I can upload a photo, a tag, status. So traditionally this would have been done on an Excel sheet, and I can just use that template, give it a name, and create it. And that will add it directly here. I can change the view of it if I need to, whatever I need to, I can do that. So I can view it as a gallery or as a list if I want. I can add something into it, so I'm just going to add a new one. I can upload a photo, tag name, status, it's available, manufacturer, whatever it may be, model number 123, and so on and so on. Okay, so if I save that, I now have it there. Now remember, I can change it to view as a gallery. So if I did have a photo in there, it'll appear directly at the top. So it's quite handy to have something like this. And of course, you can share this out with other members if you need to. So you've got that share option. Alternatively, you can do what I do and just pin it into your team that you use. So I've pinned it at the top. You can do that inside there as well. So you can click on the plus symbol and choose your lists. So that's quite handy to be able to do that and to build a list either based on an Excel sheet or from scratch, and anyone could come in and add a new item if they need to. I do recommend that you think about where you're creating that list when you start to think about the automation process later on, because when you are doing the automation, and I'll show you an example of that in terms of cover requests, how that works, the list needs to be in a place that only those that are authorized to view it should. So for example, if I go into SLT and I've got my cover requests channel, it could be the holiday requests, for example, there is my list pinned at the top, and I can see the cover requests and whether they've been approved or denied with the comment. Okay, so having that created in the correct space is an important consideration before you start to link things together. Okay, so just as a quick example, I'm going to go back to my all staff and just start to tie it into cover request. Now remember, cover requests can be interchangeable with minibus requests, holiday requests, whatever it may be. But in this particular team, I've got all my staff in here in the organization. I've got a channel called cover requests, and I've pinned at the top a cover requests form. Okay, holiday request, whatever it may be. So my staff could fill in the details. So they require training. They want the reason for that training could be Microsoft 365 training and when it's needed for, and they can put those details in there. Okay, so it's just a basic form, but the question is, what happens next? Ideally, as part of my cover request, I want this information to go straight into my list. Normally, I would open it, get the Excel sheet, go to where my list is. So my list is currently pinned here, and then add it to the list at the bottom. Okay, so I'll have to manually do that. And that's kind of a step that I want to automate. The reason for doing that is because I need to track that information as a member of SLT. Could be the transport department, and they want to keep track of the minibuses they've approved. It could be the holiday request, or it could be the manager's approval team, and you want to keep track of all the approvals and the dates that you've requested. So currently I filled that form in, but it hasn't appeared here yet. So I've requested cover, but it's not on the cover list. So we're just going to look at something a little bit more, because from my form, I want it to go to the list, but I want there to be an approval aspect to it. So I want the form completed. I want a list to be updated based on an approval. Now, there are a couple of ways to have an approval aspect in Microsoft 365. Inside of Teams, you've got a built-in approval system, just in case you're not aware of it. So you can easily use the built-in approval system inside of Microsoft Teams to do with documents that you want to upload or share, so you can request approval directly in there if you need to. Could be a document, you can allow edits to it, and once it's approved, then it'll be uploaded into the SharePoint. So that's practically built into your Microsoft Teams, so there's no thinking about that or how to build it. So I can just easily go into my channel, wherever that may be, start a new conversation, and you've got an approval option there. If it doesn't appear on your list here, you can click on the three dots and search for approval. So there it is, approvals. And from here, you can just choose the approval. What's the title of the approval? You can attach some documents into there, and you can choose to whom that the approvers are. So who should it be sent to, and who should respond to it. Okay, so you can choose certain options. That will just post it into the channel, which will allow whoever's part of that channel to either approve it or decline it. Once it's approved, then you'll get a notification to say that's approved. So that's quite handy to have. It's built in, but it doesn't really automate many processes. It just gives you an advanced feature inside of Microsoft Teams that you can use. So it's quite handy to have, and just be aware of that functionality. So if you're just thinking about approvals inside of your particular SharePoint site or team space, you can use that approvals if you need to. What we are going to look at now is the Power Automate function. Now, this is the one that can be either very basic or extremely complicated. It ties in the things that you can do, the different applications around Microsoft 365, and connects them together based on your own requirements. So for example, in Power Automate, you've got a couple of flows that you can use. It is built into Microsoft Teams, so if you are a Teams user and that's where you like working, you can just click on the three dots on the side here and you can look for Power Automate as an app. When you choose Power Automate, you get the Teams relevant automations. And you can see a few things here. So if you can have a follow-up to a message, which is personal to you. If there's a new item in SharePoint, so if somebody uploaded a file in Microsoft Teams or to a SharePoint site, you can send a notification into a particular team if you need to. And there's a whole bunch more inside of the Teams Power Automate that you can tap into. On a side note, there is also Power Automate, the full feature in Office 365. So I'm just going to go into that now just to show you what that looks like. So Power Automate allows you to create your own flows. Okay, it could be organizational flows or team specific or personal flows. So when I choose to click create, I have quite a few options that I can use, pre-made templates based on the categories that I would like to do. Okay, so one of my favorites is usually to do with forms. Okay, so I can look for a template here and say forms, and it'll list all the automation that I can do in regards to forms. So for example, I know as part of forms, when a client or a user completes a form, all they get is the standard notification that they've completed a form at the end of the form. Ideally, what I would like is for them to receive an email, a customized email directly with whatever details inside of that email directly to their email based on whatever they've entered. So you can use an automation directly that's built in to Power Automate. And it's fairly simple. I can just choose that. It'll ask me what form would you like to choose and how do you want to use the emails. It's going to look at my own accounts in there. I just need to sign into that one there. There we go. And I can choose to continue. So let's have a look at this. So when a form is submitted, okay, so it's going to ask me what form would I like to pick, and I can easily choose one of the many forms that I have available to me. So I've got all these forms here. I've just created, for example, the expenses one. So there it is. So when somebody completes the expenses form, it's going to get the ID of the expense. I'm just going to go back and find expenses. And then what would you like to happen? Well, if they've completed it, then look for the responder's email and send them this particular email. And you've got customization in there if you want to. If a particular option is no, then you can build in an aspect to it. It could be that in that expenses form, I said, would you like an approval? Do you want to join a mailing list? Whatever it may be, and I can fill that information in here. So it'll look at the items in that particular form. So there it is, the item, the cost, and the quantity, as well as the responder's email. And then I could create a condition based on that. Based on that condition, if it's a positive or a negative or a 0 or a 1 or a null or not, you can build those particular flows. So for example, if it's no, what I want to happen is I want it to update a SharePoint or a list. So I can look for SharePoint. There it is. And I wanted to add an entry, create an item. At this point, it'll ask me which SharePoint list, and I can search for my SharePoint sites that I have, wherever I created that list, and wherever that list is, and I can start to build based on that. Okay, so there's quite a lot that you can do in there, but like I said, there are templates that you can start to tap into and build. And again, I've got some resources that I can share with pre-made templates, and I recommend that when you do start building something like this, you start to think about the ultimate flow. So I know I'm starting with a form, and I know at the end I want an email to be sent out for this particular one. Okay, so you can automate things with Power Automate, and that's quite handy. So just as a few examples, like I said, you can have the holiday and cover requests and approval. So I'm just going to show you an example of what I mean by that. So I'm just going to go as Lewis Hamilton here, and in his all staff team, he's got his cover request. He's going to go to his cover request. He gets a nice little form there, and he wants to request cover like we did before. Let's say personal, and it's to do with isolation. Current topic. So he knows he needs to isolate for 10 days starting from today. So he's going to pick today till sometime. There we go. And submit it. So that's great. That's updated a form. Now, the part of the flow is I want this to be sent to a specific user for them to approve. Now, the user that I've got is me, and he's part of the SLT team. So I'm just going to jump. Notice the cover request now. There's an automation that has asked for me to approve. So here he is, Lewis Hamilton, personal request, and I'm going to approve it and say get well soon. And submit. Okay, so I've approved it, and in a moment, as part of the automation, Lewis Hamilton, once that's refreshed, there he is, he gets a little chat to say that it's been approved with the following comment, get well soon. Okay, so my particular cover request or holiday request or minibus request, whatever it may be, has been approved. So that's great. I know as Lewis Hamilton, I can now close my computer and go and isolate. But let's look at the SLT aspect. So I've just approved that as part of the SLT. Now remember, I've linked it into my list as well. It's now updated my SharePoint site. There he is, Lewis Hamilton. On this specific date, it's a personal reason for cover request, and it's been approved by me with my little comment, get well soon. Of course, you can customize this a bit further. You can change the view if you want to, like I said, as part of a list. You can have it as little icons, and you can customize that even more if you need to and save that particular view. So there's a lot you can do in lists to make it a bit more appealing if you need to inside of the SharePoint site or Microsoft Teams. Let's come back here. So putting it all together just to understand that flow, and then I'm going to leave the channel open. So I'm going to unmute your mic so you can start to ask me specific questions about this. The first aspect is you need to create your particular tools. So in my case, I created the form for capturing the data in terms of the cover request that I had initially for Lewis Hamilton. So I had my form ready, available for all users to be able to enter that data. I also had my list ready with corresponding column names. What I mean by that is the form asked for the date for when that holiday request is needed. So I've got the reason for cover, additional info, when, and until when. Okay, so those were my 4 aspects. And in my list that I created, I've got the same 4 aspects. So let me just go back to the list. I've got from, the when, from when, to when, the reason, and the details. Okay, so I create those lists to correspond to my form. Okay, I can add more fields in there, for example, approved by whatever it may be. So once I've got the list corresponding to my form, the next aspect is to connect it using Power Automate. And what I want is the form entry to update the list. Okay, so let me show you what that actual flow looks like in terms of my Power Automate. Okay, so let me just minimize that and bring up my actual form. So the Power Automate for that particular list was when a new form is submitted in my cover request in that channel, it then gets the list of responses and creates an approval. The approval was what we saw in that particular channel. So in this particular channel, I got a cover request, that one. It doesn't have to be a chatbot. It could be an email. So in this particular aspect, I chose to post a card as a Flowbot in channel, but alternatively, I can easily choose something else. So if I just add here, I can add an action and say email. Email and approval, and you've got all your email options. But in my case, I chose to post using Teams, an adaptive card, because I prefer to use Microsoft Teams than to stick with emails. So what happens is it creates that approval, waits for the approval. Once it's been approved, if it's yes, it then updates the SharePoint list with the details from the form, the corresponding details from when is the to until when. These are all the titles in the form questions. And then posts a message to the flow, to the person who's asked, saying, "Dear so-and-so, your request for cover has been approved." If it's no, it's a similar course, still updates the SharePoint list and posts a message in the Flowbot to say rejected. Okay. Alternatively, those could be email options, so I can send an email. Now, remember, this isn't very complex. It does look it, but there are templates that you can start to tap into Microsoft Flow. But before you start to dive into Power Automate, you need to have the list and the form or the process ready, and that's the crucial part. So once I connect it, I then have the action part, so adding the conditions for approval or responses. And some scenarios for that would be, like I said, I can collect the data from a form. I can send an email confirmation or a follow-up, so to the person who filled the form and the person responsible. But ideally, you'd also want an approval in there, and approvals are built into Power Automate. In case you worry about approvals, because I think that's the place that most people struggle with, if you are creating a flow and you want to use approval, there is an approval option there. And you can choose some of those templates that are pre-made for you already. Just bear in mind, you've got the form, approval, email. So in this case, it doesn't update a SharePoint list. Somebody completes a form, sends an email for approval, and then an email to say whether it's been accepted or not. Okay, so you've got those options there. And there's quite a few that you can choose from. And there's even more under all templates. So use the templates and modify them based on your needs as a starting point. Alternatively, you can create them from scratch entirely, an automated cloud flow. Okay, so the automated cloud flow means the trigger is another application, like either a new calendar entry, it could be a new email that you received, could be a new form entry, whatever it may be, that's an automated process. Instant cloud means you have to trigger it. You actually have to activate that particular flow to update. Okay, so there are a few options you can do based on approvals. Another scenario, and one that we've just started using, is when a new staff member joins your particular team. Generally, they are onboarding tasks, and usually that gets sent out via email or in the user manual or the staff handbook. What you can do now is you can actually automate so that it updates their particular planner, which is quite handy to have if you need to. So when the new member joins the team, the new member gets assigned tasks in Planner. So you can easily find that as part of the flow. So we can look at Planner, and you'll get all the approval options, the flows that you can use to do with Planner. Alternatively, I have added in the Wakelet, by the way, is that particular link, which is quite handy, and it gives you different scenarios and pre-made templates that you can use for Power Automation. So in terms of the new staff member, that's already built in for you. So when you click on that one, it'll ask and tell you what to do. So in this case, you need to download that particular automation, and then you can start to build that particular task if you need to. Okay, so just bear in mind that Wakelet has a bunch of resources that you can use if you can't really find the automation that you need. Now, I've used automation personally in order to sync my calendars in the different organizations I work with. Can Planner integrate with Outlook? There is plans for that to happen. So any calendar planner events. So if you put any due dates on your planner, it does appear in your Outlook calendar as part of your tasks. So if you're using Microsoft To Do, for example, anything that is in your planner, so anything that will appear in your planned options as well. That's linked into Planner. Alternatively, just so you're aware, Planner does appear as well in Tasks by Planner in Microsoft Teams. So if I go to Tasks by Planner and I'm part of all, I can see all my team planners here as well as my to-do tasks. So it is useful to start to tap into Planner, Tasks by Planner in Teams. And if you use that automated process in terms of onboarding new staff, so you could have an all staff planner. I don't have one here set up at this particular point, but basically it'll appear in their tasks, anything that's been assigned to them. So get biscuits for first non-virtual meeting will appear in that individual's tasks to do. Okay, so it's quite handy to start to think about how you can use Planner in your daily automation, especially with onboarding people. So I use it in terms of my calendar, as I was saying, because I work with different calendars. So when a new entry comes into one of my calendar, it copies automatically into my other calendar. And just so you're aware, the power of automation, like I said, there are so many things that you can do with it. Here's the events and calendar, and there's quite a few that you can choose from. Alternatively, you can look for example, if you're working with Google Calendar or Microsoft Calendar and you want them syncing across, you can just look for calendar. And you'll have a lot of calendar syncing options that you can do. So this particular one copies your Google Calendar entries and puts it into your Microsoft 365 calendar entries. So I use that with my family, for example. My family use Google Calendar. When they put an entry, it automatically updates my work calendar to say personal entry. So there's quite a few things that you can start to tap into. Alternatively, it can be work related as well. Okay, so the next steps in getting automated, there are those tools available to you for you to start to tap into and start to look at. But remember, the key steps for this is you need to really plan what the requirements are. So in my case, I knew I would sit down with my team and start to think about what the processes are actually involved in a particular project. So you've got to think about those requirements for the business processes that do need to be automated. Not everything can be automated, but certain tasks can be. just like my holiday or cover request, part of the automation was really the process that I wanted was the approval. But then we decided that we also need transparency in terms of the approval. So we had to build in that list option so that the SLT team can actually track to see who has been approved for cover and who hasn't on which date. So all that needs to be thought about and planned. The next aspect would be to design it. So thinking about what I've just said in terms of cover, what is the whole process that's involved? So I need my user to actually fill in a form. At that point, it needs to be approved or not approved, and then the list updated for transparency, and so on. Then you've also got the architectural design as part of your design phase. Once you've got all that mapped out based on your planning, that's when you go into the making aspect. That's where you need to spend a little bit of time to think about where I'm going to place the list, which SharePoint site, who has access to the form, is it available to just the organization or the wider community. So you need to think about that carefully in terms of your architecture. And then once that's decided, that's when you start to think about the technical aspect of it. So actually thinking about opening SharePoint, building a list, creating the form, building that automation that you need using Power Automate. That's when it all starts to come together. Obviously, after that, you need to spend some time to test it with certain data. It will never be perfect right from the start, and this is crucial to understand. There will always be some improvements you need to make based on the testing phase. Have you set the correct approvees? So for example, in my particular automation, and if I go into my flows, for example, here, there is my cover request one. And if I edit that, I can see that the only people who can approve this particular automation is just being assigned to one person. It may be that you want to add several people who can actually approve that. So you need to consider that carefully and make it sort of future proof, because if this particular person left the organization, who's going to approve that particular process for the rest of the things to sort of flow at that point? Because my particular flow doesn't continue until it's been approved. So we've got to make sure that we've got all that in place, and that's part of the testing aspect that you need to think about and consider. The next part would be to actually share that. So in my case, the way I started that particular process is all I had to do was share that particular cover request form in a channel. Alternatively, you can put it on a SharePoint, the organization's intranet, wherever it may be, and that's available. The rest of the team don't need to know what happens in the background. They just need to understand when they complete this particular cover request form, they will receive notification either via email or through Microsoft Teams, depending on how you've built that flow. So it's important to sort of start to think about that process based on the stakeholders that you've got. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to allow you to unmute and ask the questions. I am going to